It is a very one-sided and unfair one, but I don't blame China. After all, who can blame a country for being able to take advantage of another country for the benefit of its citizens? I give China great credit.
Well, that's President Trump, of course, wrapping up his Asia trip. But now, 13 days, chock full of diplomacy and pageantry. You know, one of the highlights was his meeting in China with President Xi to try and put more pressure on North Korea and Kim Jong-un, rebalance trade. He signed $250 billion in new business deals and strengthened the ties between our two nations. And you know, we're used to scenes like this, but the China breakthrough started with President Richard Nixon. You know, he embarked on his historic visit back in 1972, a move that opened China to the West. So what are the results of President Trump's trip on his legacy? Christopher Cox knows the reaction firsthand. He is President Nixon's grandson. Chris is son of Edward Cox and Tricia Nixon Cox. He's a North Africa and Asian political expert and founder of the financial advisory firm OC Global Partners. Chris, welcome. Your grandfather was basically responsible for bringing China into the modern world. So how do you think he would judge the president's efforts?
I think he'd be very impressed by what's going on today with the president's trip, Eric. If you look at the progress that was made on trade, as you mentioned, the $250 billion of deals that were signed with U.S. companies and Chinese companies, that's a tremendous boost to the U.S. economy, and it's very favorable for our country. And then if you look geopolitically, which of course was my grandfather's major area of interest, I think President Trump has been brilliant. If you look at strengthening the trilateral security cooperation between South Korea and Japan and the U.S. as it pertains to North Korea, that is no easy task. Japan and South Korea have governments that have traditionally had different opinions as to how to handle North Korea. And for President Trump to balance that and to strengthen that relationship is a huge accomplishment that he should get a lot of credit for.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he really has been having these meetings, both here and there. I mean, something else that you see that reminded me of your grandfather, in a sense. Is there a new global realism, do you think?
Yeah.
We've got 3 aircraft carrier battle groups, for example, right now, showing American power.
Yes, absolutely. Focusing on this approach, of course, of diplomacy, bringing together countries that may not share our ideological beliefs but have common interests with the United States is certainly the basis of realistic foreign policy. And I think that President Trump is focusing on that. And I think that it's really going to start to pay dividends. North Korea is a menace to the world, and President Trump is beautifully balanced, having to deal with security issues with Japan and South Korea, with China's interests in North Korea. And he's beautifully balanced that on this trip, and I couldn't be more impressed with it.
But at the same time, China hasn't gone far enough. I mean, the critics say, you know, they haven't cut off the oil. They've cut off the coal, but the businesses, the North Korean businesses, haven't been cut off yet. There's still North Korean companies in Beijing. They've been told to get out, but that hasn't happened yet. And the North Korean workers who kick back a lot of money to Pyongyang, you know, they're still working. I mean, what do you say to the critics who say that the president has not been able to, you know, pressure China enough to do more to stop Kim Jong-un?
You know, these critics need to realize that it took my grandfather 4 years from the beginning of his presidency, almost 4 years, to be able to pull off his successful trip to China. And you have to give President Trump time. And I think that he's been moving quickly and efficiently, and that he's doing the right approach with China. It's ultimately not within China's interest to have a nuclear North Korea. If North Korea were to ever use a nuclear weapon or even test an atmospheric nuclear weapon, a lot of that blowback of nuclear fallout would fall on China. A lot of the ramifications for a failed state in North Korea would affect China greatly in terms of refugees coming across the Chinese border. So I think it's within China's interest to want to solve this problem. And I think that President Trump is very smart to work through diplomatic efforts and also to show the strength of the United States military. As you said, positioning 3 aircraft carriers off the coast of North Korea to conduct exercises. That's very, very important. And all that will go towards pushing China to do more to solve the North Korean issue.
And finally, at the same time while that's going on, you know, you got the tweets, you've got all the other, you know, controversies. Does that, you know, overshadow, do you think, accomplishments? I mean, your grandfather had that, and he went off to China with that great diplomatic breakthrough.
I think that when judging President Donald Trump's record, we need to look at the results and the facts. And the facts show that there's been improvement in how the United States and China are cooperating on North Korea. The sanctions that China has put in place are some of the strongest that we've ever seen in terms of dealing with North Korea. And that's the right approach to handling it. I think when you look at trade agreements that Donald Trump signed with China in terms of, well, he hasn't signed them, but the U.S. companies have signed under Donald Trump's presidency with China, that's indicative of a policy that's succeeding. And I think that when you look at those facts, Donald Trump's making great progress. And let the tweets say what they will. I think actions matter more than words, and the actions have been quite impressive.
Yeah, Chief of Staff John Kelly today telling reporters that he doesn't pay attention to the tweets, that it's about strategy. Chris Cox, the grandson of President Richard M. Nixon, who opened up China so many years ago, and we are the beneficiaries, some of us are, of that. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see how the president's strategy works. Chris, thank you.
Thanks so much, Eric.
Of course.